Understood. I'll begin your story for. AOC mocked Ibrahim Traoré as a joke. His response left the audience in shock. Written in a powerful, cinematic tone. No headings or titles, just clean narrative in parts. Say next, whenever you're ready to continue. It happened during a roundtable live stream, one meant to be routine. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, flanked by young progressives and policy advisors, was answering a question about global movements. When someone off-camera mentioned Ibrahim Traoré's name, her reaction was immediate. A scoff, a smile that wasn't quite amused. Then the words, "Oh him, he's not a revolution. He's a reaction. He's a hashtag with a beret. A meme in fatigues." Laughter scattered across the room. She didn't say it with malice, but the dismissiveness was unmistakable. And within hours, the clip was everywhere. African news channels picked it up. Opinion pieces exploded. Twitter went to war. Some said she was right to challenge the idolization of Traoré. Others said she had just spit on the face of millions whose only voice was that young captain for Burkina Faso. But Traoré didn't respond. Not at first. He didn't tweet, didn't issue a press release, didn't call for respect. He waited until the climate summit in Nairobi. And when he took the stage in front of world leaders and activists, he looked out across the crowd. Not angry, not defensive, just still. Then he said, "In my country, when someone calls you a joke, we do not clap back. We invite them to watch what happens after the laughter dies." There was a brief silence in the auditorium after Traoré spoke those first few lines. Not out of confusion, but out of something heavier. The air felt like it had shifted, like the words had dropped into the room and refused to bounce. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't point fingers. But something in his tone made it clear. This was not going to be forgotten. The cameras zoomed in. The translator in the booth leaned forward, and every world leader in the room stopped scrolling, stopped sipping, stopped moving. He continued, "If I am a meme, then the meme must frighten you. Because I do not own jets. I do not own newsrooms. I do not have billionaires funding my message. And yet, here you are, listening." He didn't blink. He let the words sit, untouched, before taking a slow breath. "What frightens you is not my jacket. It's not my beard. It's not even my age. What frightens you is that I do not envy your institutions. I do not seek your approval. I do not want your seat at the table. I want a new table." The crowd was still. Even the moderators didn't cut in. I was called a joke. And yet, I stand before you, not with slogans, but with scars. Not with endorsements, but with consequences. You call me a reaction? Then perhaps you should ask yourselves, what did you do that required such a reaction? A hush fell over the summit hall. AOC, watching via remote link, sat frozen on screen in the background, expression unreadable. Traoré took a sip of water. Not rushed, not theatrical. Then he placed the glass down and stepped slightly away from the podium. He began to speak again, but this time, not like a politician, like a witness. "I have walked through villages where the only medical supply is a bottle of expired aspirin. I have stood beside mothers who buried their children because the nearest doctor lives a day away. I have spoken to boys who were born in a gold-rich land, and yet have never held a textbook." And you laugh. He didn't say her name. He didn't have to. You mock me, not because I am wrong, but because I make it harder for you to pretend you're right. Because I will not dance to your rhythms. I will not wear your slogans. I will not treat access to the microphone as the finish line of progress. The auditorium shifted. A subtle leaning forward. People now sitting at attention, not from obligation, but from instinct. If I am a joke, then explain to me this. Why do the people who have never had running water, who have never seen Wi-Fi, who have never voted in a safe election, trust me more than they trust you? He paused. You do not fear my policies. You fear my refusal to need your applause. Because you cannot cancel someone who does not depend on your spotlight. You cannot discredit someone who never asked to be credited. The room exhaled, but cautiously. He let the silence build, like a conductor waiting for the right moment. In your world, performance is everything. You've learned to clap for pain, retweet trauma, and turn outrage into merch. But in my world, children cry real tears. And we do not film them. We bury them. He looked down, briefly, as if holding back something. Not emotion. Restraint. You do not have to like me. You do not have to understand me. But what you will not do is laugh at a people still bleeding. You will not mock a voice speaking for the quiet. And you will not turn a revolution born from hunger and war into a punchline. The screen showing AOC went black. Technical issue or exit, no one could tell. The moderator, nervously adjusting his earpiece, stepped forward. Captain Traore, we're nearing the end of our time. Traore raised his hand gently. The moderator stepped back. You say I am a meme. Then remember, memes are what your world calls truth when it becomes inconvenient. A joke is what you call a voice too raw to package, too clear to edit. He adjusted the microphone slightly, leaned closer. And I will be your joke. Until your children ask why the joke built schools while your budgets built bombs. Until your streets chant my name not because they know me, but because they finally recognize themselves. A single clap broke out near the back. Then another. Then silence again. Traore didn't smile. He didn't raise a fist. He simply stepped back from the mic. I thank you for your time. And for the laughter. Because now that it's quiet, you might finally hear us. He left the stage without music, without handshake, without applause. But no one forgot that moment. Not even AOC. Especially not AOC. Because later that night, during a private interview in D.C., she was asked if she had any regrets about calling him a joke. She didn't dodge. She stared ahead and said, sometimes the thing you laugh at is the thing you're most afraid might be right. And with that, the interviewer leaned in and whispered, so was he. A pause. Then the smallest, sharpest nod. Yeah, he was. The summit ended, but the echo did not. By morning, the clip of Traore's speech had crossed languages. Subtitled in Portuguese, trending in Swahili, transcribed in Urdu, even broadcast in partial clips on conservative U.S. media, where it was repackaged as foreign defiance. But no matter how it was framed, one thing remained constant. No one was laughing anymore. In Harlem, a youth activist printed Traore's line, "You cannot cancel someone who never asked to be credited," on a white bedsheet and hung it from the roof of an abandoned school. In Lagos, artists painted murals of him not with fists raised, but with his hand held out, the posture of someone offering truth, not asking for it. In Congress, there was no statement from AOC. Her team stayed silent. But inside her office, the tone had changed. She sat alone with her tablet, replaying the Nairobi summit, watching herself scoff, watching him not even use her name, watching him dismantle everything with poise, not spite. She rubbed her forehead, said aloud to no one, I was wrong. But apologies don't echo as far as mockery. And Traore? He wasn't waiting for one. Instead, 2 days later, he gave an impromptu address from a rural school outside Kadagu. No press, no grand stage, just chalkboard walls and dusty light filtering through the tin roof. He stood beside barefoot children and spoke softly. Leadership is not being the smartest voice in the room. It is being the quietest voice that refuses to lie. Someone recorded it with an old phone. That clip, too, went viral. A new headline emerged across social feeds. The man who didn't clap back, but stood taller. In Washington, AOC's advisors urged her to take control of the narrative. She refused. I already lost control, and maybe I deserve to. She didn't post, didn't podcast, didn't tweet. Instead, she made a call, one that shocked even her inner circle. She requested to meet Ibrahim Traoré, not publicly, not with photographers, just as two people. The answer came 48 hours later, through a diplomat from Ghana who had become a quiet channel between camps. A handwritten note, folded once. You may visit, but not to perform. Come as a listener, or don't come at all. She booked her flight within the hour. When she arrived in Burkina Faso, there were no red carpets, no flag pins, just dry heat, a silent escort, and a 2-hour drive to an unmarked building on the outskirts of Ouagadougou. Inside, the room was sparse. No translators, no staff, only Ibrahim Traoré, and a single chair placed across from his. He gestured toward it. She sat. There was no handshake, no greeting, just eye contact, then silence. Not awkward, not hostile, just silence. A test, perhaps, or a moment of leveling. She broke it first. I didn't come to explain myself. Traore nodded. Good, because the world has enough explanations. She swallowed. You were right. He didn't react, didn't smile, just blinked slowly, I judge your image, not your context. I mocked what I hadn't tried to understand. He finally spoke. You mocked what was easier than admitting your own house was still on fire. That landed. She nodded. I've used words like justice, freedom, equity, my whole career. But when those words come from someone outside our frameworks, they scare us. Or we laugh. Because laughter feels safer than listening. He leaned forward slightly. Then perhaps you understand what we've always known. The world listens when it's comfortable, not when it's responsible. She didn't look away. I want to be better than that. But I also know wanting isn't enough. Traore paused, then stood up, slowly, and walked to the window. Dust swirled outside. Children could be heard playing in the distance. The muffled joy of a world not yet watching itself. He turned back to her. There is no ceremony for humility, no award for learning late. But sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is come to the table without bringing a microphone. She stood too. They looked at each other, not as rivals, not as leaders, not even as political figures, but as two people who had, for a moment, put ego down long enough to listen. He held out his hand. She took it, not for the cameras. There were none. That moment would never be quoted, never broadcast, never trending. But it changed them both. And quietly, it changed everything. The press never found out about their meeting. No joint statement, no leaked photo, no smug tweet. And that was exactly how it needed to be. Because some moments, if captured, lose everything they carry. Truth isn't always meant to be documented. Sometimes it needs to happen in silence, in stillness, between people, not platforms. But change, real change, doesn't wait for cameras. It unfolds in ripples. The first ripple came 2 weeks later, when AOC took the floor in Congress to address a proposed international aid package tied to strategic mineral extraction in West Africa. The bill had bipartisan backing. It was wrapped in clean language, development, stabilization, cooperation. But she stood and said, "We cannot keep trading aid for access. Not when access costs someone else their sovereignty. And not when we ignore the voices of those we say we're helping." Gasps. Whispers. The silence of tension. Then she added, "I recently met a leader who reminded me that justice isn't the act of giving. It's the act of stepping back when you've taken too much." She didn't name Traore. She didn't need to. Those who knew understood. Those who didn't began asking. It sparked fury in some corners. Accusations of being unpatriotic, of undermining U.S. foreign interests, of romanticizing populism. But this time, she didn't flinch, because she'd sat across from someone who'd faced global condescension and answered with nothing but truth. The second ripple came from Traore's end. A national address, unscripted, delivered from a community schoolyard. He stood on cracked concrete, surrounded by children and elders. I recently spoke with someone who once called me a joke. She did not come to apologize. She came to listen. And because she listened, she left stronger than she arrived. The audience didn't cheer, they absorbed. This is not a victory for me. This is a victory for what can happen when people drop performance and pick up presence. From that moment forward, the tone of discourse began to shift, subtly, then unmistakably. Commentators who'd once dismissed Traore now discussed him in policy briefings. University professors redesigned syllabi to include him alongside Mandela, Sankara, and Nkrumah, not for the wars he'd fought, but for the moments he refused to. And AOC? She didn't seek a redemption arc. She changed course. Instead of interviews, she visited immigration shelters and refugee-led schools. Instead of headlines, she began pushing for hearings on historical, economic extractions in Africa, bills with no glamour but enormous consequence. Some of her supporters were confused. Others called it political suicide. But she said something offhand in a town hall that stuck. If you're not willing to be humbled, then you're not willing to lead. By the time that clip reached Burkina Faso, it was already being quoted in classrooms. And the third ripple? That one came from the people. A social movement quietly sparked in West Africa. Hashtag not the joke, started by students, artists, midwives, and mechanics. It wasn't a fan club. It wasn't about idolizing Traore. It was about reclaiming dignity from dismissal. Placards showed up in cities across the continent. "We are the joke that you feared." Graffiti on abandoned colonial buildings read, "Still laughing." And a mural in Dakar showed a faceless figure in a U.S. suit with a speech bubble. He's a meme. Beside it, Traore with no words, just his hand outstretched, palm open, holding a seed. It wasn't rage. It was resurrection. Meanwhile, in Washington, a senator criticized AOC in a committee hearing. "You're letting some African populist embarrass the United States." Her reply? She looked him dead in the eyes and said, "He didn't embarrass us. He just told the truth. And we're not used to hearing it from someone we can't control." Silence. Then she closed her folder and left the room. That clip went viral too. But something was different now. It wasn't noise. It was clarity. And the people were starting to demand more of it. Months passed, and while the world moved on, something deep had begun to shift beneath headlines, beneath policy, in the way people spoke about leadership itself. Not just in Burkina Faso, not just in Washington, but everywhere. It was no longer about charisma, or slogans, or polished speeches. It was about who had the courage to be corrected, and who didn't. That's why, when Traore was invited to speak at the UN General Assembly later that year, there was an unusual buzz. Not because he was expected to make a fiery speech, but because the world wasn't sure what he would say at all. He arrived in New York without entourage. No black SUVs. No press team. No lavish suits. Just a single notebook in his hand. When he stepped up to the marble podium, the room hushed. Not out of deference, but anticipation. What would the meme and fatigue say to the nations that once mocked him? He flipped the notebook open and looked around the chamber. Then he said quietly, "You were right about one thing." He let the pause linger. The diplomats leaned forward. "I do not look like a leader. Not by your standards. I don't speak your dialect of diplomacy. I don't wear your brands. I don't shake hands with lobbyists before breakfast." A few smirks in the crowd. He noticed. "But here's the thing. Your standards aren't working anymore. No smirks now. You build summits while your people sleep on the streets. You give aid while extracting minerals. You praise democracy while sponsoring coups. And then you ask why people look elsewhere." The room fell completely still. Leadership is not performance. It is pain, carried well. And some of us, those you call jokes, have carried more pain than your entire political dynasties. He wasn't angry. He was exact. "You said I was a meme. But memes don't build clinics. Memes don't stand with mothers in refugee camps. Memes don't negotiate ceasefires while Western-backed drones fly overhead." He flipped a page in his notebook. "I was mocked by a congresswoman. I did not retaliate. She came to me. She listened. She changed. That is not weakness. That is the beginning of peace." Now the chamber was silent. Not polite, but convicted. What we need now is not another funding round, or mission, or resolution. We need you to listen. And not because we yell out enough, but because your silence has cost lives. He closed the notebook. "You laughed. Now you're listening. That is progress. Don't waste it." And with that, he stepped away. No applause protocol followed. Just a long, uncomfortable quiet. Until someone, no one quite knows who stood, then another, then another. A quiet standing ovation. No cheering. No clapping. Just a room rising out of respect. Later that night, AOC tweeted a photo of the chamber, writing only. "He didn't come to perform. He came to teach. I'm still learning." And underneath that, she added the hashtag that had spread across continents. Hashtag not the joke. That tweet would go on to be retweeted over 11 million times. But it wasn't the number that mattered. It was that the world had watched someone refuse to respond with ego and change the definition of what strength looked like in real time. Back in Burkina Faso, Traore didn't hold a press conference about the speech. He returned to his village. He visited a classroom, sat with elders, and when asked by a young boy what it felt like to speak to the world, he said, "Like finally saying what we've whispered for generations, and realizing they heard us this time." The boy asked, "What if they forget again?" Traore smiled. "Then we remind them, not with fury, with truth, again and again, until it sticks." And yet, truth never stays clean. What happened next wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even loud. It was a whisper caught in a leak. An off-record briefing from a U.S. State Department official, recorded by someone who should not have been in the room. The voice was unmistakable. "We can't let this guy keep defining the conversation. He's getting too much traction with our own base. I don't care how many speeches he gives. He's a soldier with a mic, not a diplomat. Another voice chimed in, colder. Let him talk. Just make sure no one listens. The file was just over 48 seconds long, but it detonated like a bomb. Uploaded anonymously to an encrypted platform. Transcribed. Subtitled. Reposted by journalists in Dakar, Johannesburg, New York. Suddenly, the message was no longer about Traore's dignity. It was about the fear he'd exposed. Headlines broke fast. U.S. officials caught undermining Traore's global rise. Truth is not welcome. The quiet campaign to silence Africa's new voice. Soldier with a mic. Why the West feels threatened by listening. But Traore? He didn't react right away. 3 days passed. Then 4. When a journalist finally cornered him at a school opening and asked for comment, he just nodded slowly and said, I've always known the volume of my voice would scare those who never had to hear it before. This isn't new. It's just recorded. And still, he didn't rage. Didn't retaliate. But around him, others did. Protests erupted outside U.S. embassies in multiple African capitals. Not violent, but undeniable. Placards reading, You mocked us. Now you fear us. We don't need permission to be heard. If Traore's a threat, what does that say about you? In Washington, things grew tense. AOC was cornered on Capitol Hill. A reporter asked, bluntly, Do you stand by Traore even after this leak? She didn't blink. Yes. Even if it costs you politically? She leaned into the mic. Some things are bigger than politics. Like having the courage to listen after centuries of not listening. I've seen what he stands for. And I'd rather lose office than pretend silence is leadership. That moment, raw, unscripted, sent shockwaves again. Cable news anchors scrambled to reframe the narrative. Was she aligning herself with foreign populism? Was this anti-American? But the people, they saw something different. They saw someone admitting they'd learned. And they saw someone else, Traore, refusing to weaponize that learning. Then came the moment no one expected. A former U.S. president, one who hadn't spoken publicly in years, released a short statement. No press conference, no cameras. Just a paragraph. I don't know Captain Traore personally, but I know this. When a man speaks truth and doesn't flinch, you don't silence him. You listen harder. Signed, Barack Obama. That quote would end up etched in murals. Painted across bridges. Whispered in rallies. And Traore? Still no counterattack. No PR blast. He simply released a single sentence on Burkina Faso's state radio. They tried to bury my voice. But they forgot it was already planted.